Good evening, everyone. Welcome to New York Buddha Dharma. Let's bow in. So we are working our way through Volume 1. Is it a little loud? Okay. Of the Profound Treasury of the Ocean of Dharma by Chogyam Trungpa. We are nearing the end of Volume 1. Volume 1 is dedicated to the first stage of the path as it's described in Tibetan Buddhism. The path is divided into three vehicles, they're called yanas in Sanskrit. And the first vehicle is the Hinayana, or lesser vehicle. And the second is the Mahayana, or greater vehicle. And the third is the Vajrayana, or adamantine, or indestructible vehicle. And we are on the end of the first, the Hinayana. Trungpa Rinpoche preferred to call it the foundational vehicle. The lesser vehicle was kind of a slam that the Mahayanists, the people who subscribe to the middle vehicle or even the later vehicle, the Vajrayana, looked down upon the Hinayana, and he didn't look down on it at all. He felt it was valuable and foundational. And for 13 years, every year, well, there were some skips. I think it extended over a 16-year period. Trungpa Rinpoche took a group of his students ranging from 100 to 250 away for 3 months every year. That was called seminary, the Vajradhatu Seminary. And it was held in various places. It was always held in sort of places like ski resorts during the off-season, so that the price would be right. The first one was held in Jackson Hole, and the second one was held in in Aspen, in Snowmass, and at the resort there. We rented it, and it was cheap because it was the fall. And then every year after that, we went to different places, including Banff, up in Canada, and there was a place in Pennsylvania. And during that period, what he did was he gave teachings, and so there would be basically each 3-month period was divided between practice, and when by practice I mean all practice. It was like doing what we called a nyintun every day. That means you practice from 7 in the morning till 8 or 30 or 9 at night, with alternate periods of sitting and walking meditation, and then breaks for meals, and which were done in oryoki, the Japanese oryoki style. It's a ritual form of eating, so that eating itself becomes an act of meditation. It becomes an awareness practice. And then those periods of pure practice would alternate with periods when there was study, and there would be classes, and in the evenings, Trungpa Rinpoche would lecture, and during the days, some of his students would give classes, and they'd be sitting as well during those periods, but just less because the class work that was going on. And so he originally had restricted only people who had been to a seminary could have access to the transcripts of the Vajrayana sections. Anybody could get access, if you were a student of Buddhism, to the Hinayana and the Mahayana sections. But he also left in his will instructions that at some point in the future, people should have access to those Vajrayana transcripts. And we reached that point in the future, and Judy Leaf digested all those talks from the 13 years of seminary into these 3 volumes. And so we've been going through the first volume of the Hinayana talks. Now, these are very heavily edited, and if you're reading them along with us, you're reading the editing that Judy and some helpers did. If you read the transcripts or watch videos of these talks, then you see Trungpa Rinpoche and you get much more of his flavor. But it's also less clear because of his style of presentation, and she edited it in a way that makes it clearer, perhaps, as all his editors did. We're going to finish this volume in a few more weeks. I forget how many, not too many more. And then what we're going to do is we're going to switch into a course that will be running up in Westchester Buddhist Center, and we're going to run it down here too, on the very first book of his talks that was published in the United States. It's called Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism. And this book is very interesting. It's going to be interesting to try and teach it again. It's very heavily slanted towards the relationship between the student and the Vajrayana teacher. There are different levels of teacher. There's the Hinayana teacher and the Mahayana teacher and the Vajrayana teacher. And this book is slanted towards the relationship of the students with him. And I'd say that about half the book is about that. And so we're going to see how well that plays. Now, it's full of other things too, even when he's talking about the relationship with the teacher. It's talking about what the student has to go through to progress along the path. And then it's also a rich compendium of Buddhist doctrine. Everything from the description of the Four Noble Truths to the birth of ego, to the 6 realms of existence. These are psychological portraits of our neurotic mind. And as well as he talks about what he calls the open way and the strict or narrow way, the different kinds of path. And he also talks about the key doctrines of the Mahayana, shunyata. There's a really amazing presentation of shunyata, I think, in that chapter when he goes through the Heart Sutra and uses it to help us understand what emptiness is, shunyata being emptiness, and the Bodhisattva path. And the reason I'm telling you this is we're going to do it here, and I encourage you all to come. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And when you come, I also really encourage you to read the book. This book has sold upwards of 500,000 copies since it was published in the early 70s. And there are many, many people who I've run into and others too who will say this is the book that turned them on to Tibetan Buddhism or Buddhism altogether. So it's powerful. I think it's powerful mainly because, while he's giving in this book beginning teachings, the last chapter is on the Vajrayana. It's called Tantra. Tantra is another symbol, another word for Vajrayana. Tantrayana, Vajrayana, Mantrayana. These are all synonyms for the same section of the path. But nonetheless, he always taught in a very unusual way. He taught from the perspective of the end of the path, the teachings of the end of the path. And so he didn't teach in a very beginning way for beginners. He taught beginning doctrine, but it was in a very advanced style. One of his students has recently written a book called The Backwards Path of Ati. Ati is the last stage of the path within the Vajrayana. It's the ultimate teaching in the Nyingma system. Nyingma is one of the four sects of Tibetan Buddhism. And for them, the Vajrayana is divided into 6 subdivisions, 6 yanas, the last of which is called Dzogchen, Great Perfection, or in Sanskrit sometimes it's called Ati, or Mahasandhi. And Trungpa Rinpoche always, basically what he was giving us were the beginning teachings. They were in the style of Ati, and very profound, because he had great faith in his students, in their ability to understand, and also because he had communicated the depths of the teachings, often personally, one-on-one, to all the people who were listening to him in interviews and personal communications. So we'll be talking about that. So today we are talking about the teachings of the Hinayana, the first volume of the seminary transcripts, digested. Last time, before we did last session, we did the Sadhana Mahamudra, right? A lot of us were here for that, and that was great. That's a very Vajrayana practice, to say the least, and it's really all about devotion, that thing. And by devotion, it's very interesting. When people hear the word devotion, especially towards a teacher, a guru, they think of heartfelt feeling, of gratitude, of emotionality, of and maybe of service, that one devotes oneself to the teacher and performs services. But really, the most profound meaning of devotion is to come completely present in this present moment. And the teacher teaches that in the relationship with the student, a very personal relationship, about how to come present deeply, powerfully. And that is the real meaning of devotion. And that's what, when we go through Cutting Through, you'll see he's talking about that quite a bit. So here we are at the end of the Hinayana path, and the chapter that we're talking about today, I'm actually going to briefly mention the chapter before our last meeting, which was on the Shravakayana. See, the Hinayana is divided into two sub-yanas. Yana means vehicle, right? It means cart, literally. It's the vehicle that carries us on the path. And the Hinayana's lesser vehicle is divided into these two sub-yanas, the Shravakayana, which is the vehicle of the hearers. These are people who are listening to the teachings. And the second yana is the Pratyekabuddhayana. And Pratyekabuddha is perhaps best translated as Self-enlightened Buddha. So these are the two yanas. Now the Shravakayana is the entrance into the path. This is where a person enters. And what you're doing at this stage of the path is you are studying the core foundational teachings, which are primarily, among other things, the Four Noble Truths, the first teachings the Buddha gave after he achieved enlightenment. So you're studying these. They're the truth of that there is suffering, that there is an origin to this suffering, that there is a cessation to the suffering, can be, and that there is a path leading to the cessation. And it's all about how to understand those four things. And the core practice, this is the intellectual side, but the core practice, meditation practice, is the practice of shamatha. Shamatha is a practice that one does only on a cushion. You don't do it walking around. You are probably doing it with your eyes closed. And you are focusing your mind one-pointedly on an object, a definable object. The most common one is the breath, but other objects might be a mantra. If you're doing TM, this is what a Buddhist would call shamatha. If you're focusing on an image, could be anything. Could be a stick in front of you, and literally, and later in more advanced practices, you will focus on a stick. That's another story. And it could be anything, any object that is definable so that you can focus your mind on it one-pointedly. And the virtues of this are threefold. That, first of all, you become aware, as many, if not most people are not, of how much we're lost in thought. I find after 50 years, I'm still amazed to find that I'm lost in thought. Because when you're lost in thought, you don't even notice it, right? You're too busy being lost in thought. And then suddenly you realize, oh my gosh, I'm thinking, But most people, not only are they not aware of it, and this goes for us, perhaps before we came to meditation, but their loyalty is to thought, as is ours probably, many of the people in this room, if not everyone. When I say your loyalty is to thought, what I mean by that is you believe what you think. And what we think is that I am a terribly important person. And that I have to be concerned about my welfare, my happiness, my unhappiness, what people are saying about me, how they're treating me. Am I rich? Am I poor? Am I lonely? Am I healthy? I. And it's a constant drama. A drama of happiness and unhappiness. And so the first thing that happens is that we begin to realize the extent to which we're lost in these dramatic I-dominated thoughts. Because the way we begin to notice it is we begin to step out of them momentarily from time to time. How do we do that? By focusing on an object. When we focus on the object, we have to cut the thought. We're thinking. Suddenly you realize, oh, I'm thinking. I've lost track of my breath. And you come back to the breath, and the thought is cut. The thought with all of its anxiety, forward momentum, thoughts about the past and the future. They're all fictions that we tell ourselves. And that's cut, and we come back to awareness. So the second virtue is discovering awareness. The gaps between thoughts. Thoughts have a beginning and end. I'm hungry. It has a beginning and an end. And before the beginning and after the end, there is a gap. If only for a split second before the next thought arises. Think I'll have a hamburger. Whatever it might be. But there's a gap. And we are actually working with those gaps when we practice awareness of our meditation practice. And the third benefit is that not only are we aware of the gaps, but we begin to develop the power of being able to focus our mind on the gap, on whatever it is we're focusing on the breath, on that candle flame, on the mantra. And that ability to focus, to come back from thought and to focus the mind is terribly important. It's like developing a power of concentration, of muscle. So this is the main virtue of shamatha, and this is what the shravaka, the person, that's the hearer, person who's hearing the teachings, develops that talent, that ability to do those things through the practice of shamatha. Now, the second dhyana, there's a question about this dhyana, whether it is developmental, one develops into it, or whether it's simply another style. How many people here have done the reading? Oh, one, two. In it, Rinpoche says that it's another style. It's not developmental. He says that in the beginning. And yet, later on in the chapter, it sounds like it's developmental. And I think that that's because he said different things at different times. And these chapters, you remember, are a digest. Judy is digesting a lot of different talks into one. And sometimes we get conflicting stories. And I think that having to do with the Pratyekabuddhayana, you can view it either way, as being developmental or as simply another style. The hearer is a social kind of person. The Pratyekabuddha, for the most part, is not. Now, there are two styles of Pratyekabuddha. What Trungpa Rinpoche called the parrot or the rhinoceros. The parrot is social. Yap, 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 constantly, chirping away and making noises and socializing with other parrots and birds. The rhinoceros hardly speaks, just like this, right? These are two different styles of Pratyekabuddha. But both of them have in common this feature, that their emphasis is very much on the one hand, the intellect, and on the other hand, a particular style of meditation, which is the next style of meditation, which is vipassana. Vipassana in Sanskrit, vipassana in Pali, for those of you who've hung out in Pali circles. And vipassana is usually translated as awareness meditation or insight meditation. It's both. It produces both awareness and insight. Because whereas, you can't practice shamatha while you drive a car, because you're focused one-pointedly on an object. You could have a serious accident, right? You're not aware of the panorama of that the car is moving through. With vipassana, if you practice vipassana, you will drive better, because vipassana is wide open awareness. Instead of being focused on an object, we are opening our gaze and taking in everything. Trungpa Rinpoche used to say, figuratively speaking, it's 360 degrees. And that's figurative because you can't see, in your back. But figuratively, it feels like that. You're just resting in the space of now. And it's this wide open awareness. And it produces, has two main virtues. First of all, it makes you much more aware of your life. And you do it with your eyes open. You can do it with the eyes closed, but it's more effectively done with the eyes open. And especially, vipassana is done off the cushion. You do it, it's called in what is called ironically, it's called post-meditation experience, as though you had stopped meditating. But actually, if you're doing vipassana, that's the best meditation. And you do it off the cushion while you're driving your car, while you're walking down the street, while you're talking to a friend. You come back from thought to awareness of what's going on wide in the present moment. And ultimately, the better you get at doing it, the more effortless it is, because vipassana is what we are. It's not something we have to do. It's something we come back to. It's already there. It's our fundamental being, this open, easy awareness. And when you do it as well as it can be done, it's completely effortless. And at the highest levels of the path, at Ati, at Dzogchen, that I talked about before, this is the practice. It's perfected at the Dzogchen level. And it has different names there. It's called Trekchit, which means cutting through any kind of confusion. Cutting through to what? To this. Open awareness in the present moment. So at the Pratyekabuddha level of the path, you begin to practice vipassana a lot more. It contains within it the elements that are important of shamatha. The awareness of thinking, the awareness of the gaps, because we still have thinking in gaps in our vipassana practice. And it also has the ability to focus the mind. It's not really like a narrow focus. It's the ability to stay in the present. Or think of it this way, that you're in the present and then you notice your mind has gone off and you've been thinking about your mother in Poughkeepsie or your lover in Tallahassee. And then you say, oh, thinking, and you come back to this. And that is cultivated, that coming back. And so that the idea is that you can rest for longer and longer periods of time. Isn't that a key word? Rest. You're resting. It's the ultimate rest. There is zero effort in perfect awareness. And they teach this. In each level of the teachings teaches it more and more. And this is the practice of the Pratyekabuddha. Now, intellectually, the Pratyekabuddha is analyzing his or her neurosis, because by analyzing the neurosis, you get the conviction that it is neurosis, and you begin to be led back to sanity. And the classic paradigmatic Pratyekabuddha, self-enlightened Buddha, what they do is, this is almost like a stereotype, right? In India, in the old days, and even now to some degree, that when a person died, and if they were poor, and they couldn't afford to be cremated, their family couldn't afford to cremate them, what they would do is they would take the body and put it out in what was called a charnel ground. This was a place dedicated to this. You're cold. Wow. Should we turn on the heater? Okay. Anybody else cold? No? So it was dedicated to as a place to put bodies for people who were too poor to, if you're wealthy, the best way to dispose of a body, if you can afford it, is to have it cremated on the banks of the Ganges, the river that springs from Shiva's brow, and then the ashes thrown into the Ganges. And this is done, the classic place to do this is at Benares, Varanasi. It's called Varanasi. It used to be, under the British, it was called Benares. And today, if you go there to the Ghats are terraces that come down to the river, the Ganges. And the rivers are maybe a mile wide, there. And at the upper end of the terrace, the upriver end of these terraces, that's where the burning grounds are. And they're burning the bodies, and they're throwing the ashes into the Ganges, which springs, you see, from Shiva's brow. Shiva lives on Mount Kailash, and he lives up there, and the river springs from his brow and comes all the way down. And so you're uniting with Shiva. And meanwhile, if you go there, you go down there in the morning. Anybody ever done this? No? Well, it's the classic tourist thing to do. You have? Yeah. Huh? As a child? Oh boy, it's really something. You go down, I went there years ago, and you find a guide. I had a guide, and he took me down, and we had a boat reserved. And you come down these narrow alleys that are so narrow that you can put your arms out, and touch the walls on either side, and they are lined by people begging. And so your guide will give you a big bag of 10 paisa pieces. These are each one of them is worth less than a penny. And you give them out to the people who are begging. And you get down to the river, and the Ghats, these terraces coming down, they extend for about a mile, the Ghats. And there are buildings up at the upper end side, up the upper part of the Ghats. And people are waiting their turn to come down the Ghats and bathe in the Ganges, because it's Shiva's river. It's the holy river. It's a holy thing to do, to bathe in the Ganges. Everybody's there doing everything you can think of. There are people soaping up, taking baths in the river. There are people brushing their teeth. There are people doing yoga and asanas on the steps of the Ghats. Every darn thing you can think of. And there are, it's innumerable. I asked my guide, I said, how many people do you think are here? Because as far as you can see, a mile, they're going up the Ghats and waiting their turn to get down. And he said, maybe a few 100,000, And I said, wow. I said, is this a special day? He said, oh, yes, this is a very holy day, very holy day. And I said, that's why there's so many people, And I said, well, how many such holy days are there in the year? And he said, 300. And that's India for you. So there are these charnel grounds, you see, and where you throw the body of a person who can't afford that burial at the Ganges. And then animals come and eat it. Now, what yogis did, Pratyekabuddhas, this is the Pratyekabuddha practice, is they wanted to remind themselves of the seriousness of this endeavor that they were taking on, treading the path. And they would go to a charnel ground and meditate there and pick up a bone of a corpse, and they watch the animals feeding, and they'd pick up this bone, and they would think, where does death come from? Death comes from birth. Where does birth come from? Birth comes from becoming a human being. Where does becoming come from? Becoming comes from grasping. Like you grasp something, you grasp that piece of licorice, and you immediately become a person now who's eating a piece of licorice. You grasp after that job, and you now become a person who's a worker, Where does grasping come from? Grasping comes from desire. Where does desire come from? Desire comes from feeling. You feel positive or negative or indifferent feelings about the world, and that makes you want to grasp it or push it away from you or stay neutral. And where does feeling come from? Feeling comes from contact. And what I'm doing, you see, is taking you backwards through what are called the 12 nidanas. These are the 12 steps of coming into being. And the yogi thinks backwards through them. And so the next one is contact. Contact of what? Contact of the eye and its object. Contact of the ear and a sound. Contact of the sense of touch and a something to touch. They're the six knowables and the minds that apprehend them. And that's the contact. Sparsha, it's called. And where does sparsha come from? Sparsha comes from the division of the world into the six senses and their objects, called sub-yanas. And where does that come from? That comes from consciousness. Consciousness appears and then it divides into six. These six styles of knowing the world. Where does consciousness come from? Oh no, it comes from, I'm sorry, there's one I missed. Name and form. It's between consciousness and contact. And then there's name and form, and then there's consciousness. And before consciousness, there is what is called samskara. How do you describe this? Samskara are the tendencies of mind to orient in particular patterns. And finally, they produce pure, full-blown consciousness, the sense of I. And this is called name and samskara. And samskara comes from the first of the 12 nidanas, which is ignorance. And ignorance is the separating out of this ground of being that we inhabit into I and other. And so from ignorance all the way around to birth and then finally death. And the yogi sits there, the Pratyekabuddha. And the idea is that you become convinced that the whole thing is a deconstructible story. And that in fact, what reality is not the 12 nidanas. The 12 nidanas are the stuff of confusion, of ignorance. And they lead us into constant birth and death again and again and again. Both in the course of our lives, we are born and we die, again and again as different aspects, like this meeting will be born and will die, and also our lives altogether. We're born as infants and we'll die as old people. And so this is the Pratyekabuddhayana. It's very intellectual, this exercise, but it serves to convince, through contemplating these nidanas over and over again, the yogi, that in fact I is just this constant turning of the wheel of the 12 nidanas again and again and again. We think it's a real thing, the I, but it's not. It's just a construct, a story, a set of 12 steps. So, these are the practices of the Shravakayana and the Pratyekabuddhayana. The style of the Pratyekabuddha, you see, is that is very separate. They are self-contained, and they achieve a level of realization through their practice of vipassana and through their contemplations. That is called the 1.5-fold egolessness. You're getting a lot of doctrine tonight. The whole point of the Buddhist path, is to discover egolessness. That's one of the that's the key to getting rid of suffering, because suffering is what constellates around this belief in I, this sack of woe that we carry around, veil of tears, which is me. And so the whole idea is that you become convinced and you actually can live in the fact of egolessness. And there are two kinds of egolessness. The ego of self and the ego of other. They go together. If that is there, then therefore I am here perceiving it. It's, remember, it's a thing, you need something out there to have a reference point so that you know that you exist here, right? Remember the sensory deprivation experiments? And the idea was that maybe you'd lose the sense of identity if you couldn't contact something external. That was back in the 60s. Hard to pull off. To really cut off all sense information. So the first egolessness is the one discovers through this contemplation and other things, is that I, this thing that we have been talking about, is a myth. It's a fiction, or as Trungpa Rinpoche preferred, a lie. It's because it's pernicious. It distorts the world, it turns us into criminals, it makes us suffer. And we pursue the interest of this fictional I to everyone else at everyone else's expense, and turns us into criminals of one degree or another. And it's the first of the two to go. The way it goes at the Hinayana level is this. The way it's dissolved is that the Hinayana notices that what we talk about as being an I is just a collection of parts. My hand, my body, my different parts of my body, the different actions of my mind which come and go a lot. One minute I'm having a sad thought, the next minute I'm having a happy thought, one minute I'm having an angry thought, the next minute I'm just concentrated on my meditation practice. All of these aspects of mind come and go, and yet we treat the mind as though it were one thing, this I, right? Both mental and physical. So what the Hinayanists came up with was a theory that all of experience is a rising and flashing away of momentary experiences. The experience of this word, the experience of that tactile sensation, the experience of a thought. And these things flash in and out of being in the present moment. They're just instantaneous. They have a real existence, according to the Hinayanists, but only for a split second. These are called dharmas, not in dharma in the sense of teaching, dharma in the sense of like atoms of experience. And there are physical atoms and there are mental atoms, and they have an existence only for a split second in time. They come into being and endure and pass away really fast. And all of our experience is made up of these atoms. And in fact, if you do really good shamatha practice, they say you can begin to see the atoms of experience flashing in and out of being. And one begins to realize that what we had called an I is just a collection of parts. And at any given moment, it's completely different than it was the moment before. It's a collection of parts in the same way, and here's the classic analogy, as that a cart. We say a cart. We talk about a cart, and as though it exists. But what is a cart? A cart has a wooden sides and a wooden bed, and it has 4 wheels, and it has a couple of axles, and it may have a steering mechanism. Now, you can take it completely apart, and then where's the cart? It's gone. Same thing with a self, what we call the self. It's just a collection of parts, and this I is a name that we give to it that has no real existence. Only these parts flashing in and out of being. And so the egolessness of the Hinayana path, of the Hinayana stage of the path, of the Pratyekabuddha, is that they give up the name I and they come back into the pure experience of everything that's flashing in the present moment. So it requires being able to come back to the present very powerfully. And then one lives in a very different way. Now, then there's the issue of the dharmas, these things, these atoms, which have a real existence, if only for a split second, right? They say that an atom endures, in the scriptures they say it endures, these dharmas, if you were to stack 60 petals of a flower in a stack and then drive a pin through them, the amount of time it takes to go through each petal is the amount of time that a dharma endures. And there's a whole theory, the Hinayana theory of the Dharma theory. This is you will study this if you stay a Buddhist long enough, the Dharma theory. Each school of after the Buddha died, I'm covering a lot of ground here. After the Buddha died, the Sangha, the Buddhas that had his students, fractured over time, in the next 100 and 200 years. And in fact, this period of about 200 years is called the period of the 18 schools. Who knows if there are really 18 or not. The only ones which have survived are there was a school called the Slavira Vada. Vada means doctrine, Slavira means elders. And that went south to Ceylon and then to Southeast Asia. And Slavira in Pali is Terra, and so this is the Theravada. The other school that survived was called the Sarvasti Vada. Sarvasti means everything exists. And so it's the doctrine that everything exists, all the dharmas. And that went north. And that became the Hinayana stage of the path for Tibetan Buddhism, the Sarvasti Vada. There's a third, one of the 18 schools, that didn't really survive. It was called the Mahasanghikas, the Greater Sangha adherents. And that, everyone thinks, is what evolved into the Mahayana with the doctrine of the Bodhisattva and Shunyata and so forth. And that went to China and Japan and Korea and to Vietnam too. And it also went to Tibet. So, where was I on this? I was telling you that each of these schools had a list of dharmas. These are the things that exist. Gunther called them, Herbert Gunther was a great German scholar, eccentric, was a friend of Naropa, a friend of our Sangha, and he called them atoms of experience, as though we could take our experience and divide it into teeny-weeny little atoms, like this word. The sensation of hot for a split second, on your cheek, whatever. And there's another Buddhist scholar named Steve Goodman. Anybody ever read anything by Steve? He's out in California. He's a student of, he's a very brilliant guy. He's run seminars where he's gotten people together and they've come up with their own list of dharmas, because anybody could do it. A list of what is it that exists. And these dharmas are organized into different schemes to explain different aspects of confusion and the path. One of the schemes that they're organized into is the 12 nidanas. And you might have 80 dharmas in a particular scheme, and they'll be organized into the 12 nidanas. The first nidana is ignorance, avidya, that's one. The second is samskara. There'll be like 75 in that group. And then the third is namarupa, name and form, and there'll be 2 in there. And then the fourth is consciousness, 1 dharma, and so forth, all around the 12. Another scheme for organizing the dharmas is the 5 skandhas. A lot of you are here familiar with the 5 skandhas. That's a description of ego. And those are another organization of the dharmas. So this is the Hinayana stage of the path, working with these dharmas, understanding ignorance and confusion and the belief in self. And then you see, so the Hinayana practitioner discovers the egolessness of self, that self, I, is just a name like cart, attached to these myriad experiences that are popping, flashing in and out of being in the present moment. But then there's the question of, do those things that are flashing actually exist? And what the next stage of the path, the Mahayana stage, says is, no, they don't. And completely don't. And that's the doctrine of emptiness, shunyata. But the Pratyeka Buddha and a lot of the Shravakas, the more advanced Shravakas, get to a stage where they almost understand the whole thing, but not quite. And that's called the 1.5-fold egolessness. They, to some degree, to a greater degree, they understand egolessness of self, that I don't exist, which is a tremendous accomplishment because it frees you from suffering in the gross sense. You're not going to go worry about your life anymore, when you don't believe that I is a real thing. And so the Hinayana is to transcend suffering. What an accomplishment. It's terrific. Not only that, but they cease to do harm because there's no more feeling of self-aggrandizement, worrying about me and what I'm getting out of this whole thing. So the Hinayanist ceases to do harm, but they don't fully understand the non-existence of everything, of I and other. And so they don't fully develop the ultimate clear seeing and they don't develop compassion, full-blown compassion. They're still very much self-contained, the Hinayanist, dwelling on their freedom from suffering. It's a terrific accomplishment, though. And you cease to do harm. You're not screwing up the world anymore. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. You're not screwing up other people's lives, causing pain. So that's the Hinayana stage of the path, and the name for the person who's realized it fully, has realized all of this fully, understands the 12 nidanas, understands all these teachings of the Dharma theory, is an arhat. And there are names for people who have approached the rank of arhat, like the first stage below arhat is non-returner. You become a non-returner. You're not going to return to samsara. Why? Because you've discovered that I don't exist, and you can't return to samsara, to confusion. But you haven't gotten to the real reality and to full-blown compassion, which comes at the Mahayana stage of the path. There's still a dwelling on one's freedom and all these teachings. This is a lot of doctrine you got tonight. If you study this at the Hinayana level, you study what's called the Tripitaka. The Tripitaka is the complete collection of Hinayana teachings, and what it means is 3 Tripitaka baskets. One basket is the set of rules of behavior, and there are rules for lay people like us, and they're few in number. Then there are rules for people who are aspiring to become monks or nuns, and there are more rules. And then there are rules for monks and nuns, and there are a lot, hundreds, of rules of behavior. Because what happened was, it's not that people are so bad that they need a lot of rules, but as the Sangha developed, they found that, if people ate in the afternoon, they might get logi in their meditation practice and fall asleep more. So one of the rules is you don't eat after midday. All food is consumed before midday if you're a monk or a nun. Things like that, they're practical issues. So that's one of the 3 baskets. And there's a reason I'm going through this. The second of the 3 baskets is called the Sutra Pitaka. And this is the conversations that the Buddha had with his students. We don't study those much in the Tibetan tradition because you see, the Tibetans feel that there were so many enlightened people who came after the Buddha and reinterpreted what he said, and we mostly study their teachings, people like Padmasambhava, Vimalamitra, and then more recent teachers like Chogyam Trungpa, and other people. But at the Hinayana stage of the path, the Theravadins study the Sutra Pitaka a lot, and there are many, many teachings of the Buddha in there, and usually, I think maybe always, they're in dialogue with the students. The one that's not in the Sutra Pitaka, but you might be familiar with, is the Heart Sutra. And it's the Buddha speaks very little, but he does speak. And then the third basket is called the Abhidharma Pitaka, and that's about what I've been talking about here, these dharmas that go to make up all of being, and it explains them, and it explains different organizations of them. How many people here have read or performed the Heart Sutra? Yeah, okay. Well, in the Heart Sutra, one of the things they're doing is denying that the dharmas exist. That's the first statement, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Form is no other than emptiness, emptiness is no other than form. That's a denial of the first dharma, the dharma of form. You know? And then in the same way, no feeling, perception, formation, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose. They're going through all the dharmas. You know, that's what they're denying. The Mahayanists are denying. They're saying they don't actually exist either. It's a Hinayana misconception. But at the Hinayana stage of the path, you still pretty much believe in them. It's the 1.5-fold egolessness. You believe that things actually have, that these experiences have some truth. So I'm going to stop there. This was a doctrine download, I guess, as it turned out, but that's what the chapters were that you were assigned. And we could have a discussion. Complaints, comments. Oh, and there, we'll pass the mic. There's a mic here that we'll pass around when you speak.
Yeah, the rhinoceros, well, the Pratyekabuddhayana.
Yeah, the rhinoceros and the parrot. Yeah.
Even in the chapter, he talks about, Rinpoche talks about the arrogance of those people, and they don't even have any time for the lineage.
Right.
You
read the chapter.
How do you distinguish between that and ego, and a sense of self, if they have no time for other?
That's the failing of the Pratyekabuddha. It's a subtle sense of self that has inhered, and it comes with. You see, all the way up to enlightenment, right through the Mahayana, the ego is still there, just in subtler and subtler and subtler forms. And this is what's meant by spiritual materialism. Spiritual materialism is the feeling that I'm getting it. So the spiritual materialism of the Hinayana, which is gross, you know, compared to later, a lot better than ignorant people, but still it's gross compared to what comes later. But the classic ego of the Hinayana stage of the path, of the Pratyekabuddha, who has really understood a lot, is, I've understood a lot. I've understood egolessness.
So that the Pratyekabuddha is they're doing it their own way, yet they're getting it? So
they're getting it, but there's still this little watcher back there saying, is this it? Yeah, this is it. Because you want the confirmation that you're doing it right. You want to locate yourself on the path.
Right. It also refers to the journey as a continuous loop over and over and over and over again, which is not very appealing either.
Yeah. You see, it's like it's so hard to become convinced that that whole thing of me having to protect and improve myself is not true. We really, really are convinced that we have to protect and improve ourselves, make ourselves better in one way or another. And it gets thinner and thinner as one goes along the path. And one way of protecting and improving yourself is to discover that you don't need to protect or improve yourself. And you can say to yourself, ooh, I'm beginning to understand that. See, the watcher, it's back there. It's like it's commenting. It's saying, this is good, that's bad. It just gets more and more subtle until finally the awakening, maybe, if I could guess, is that you really, really believe and understand that this is it. And that you don't have to go someplace else. But it takes a while to get there. So, all along the path, the watcher gets thinner and thinner and thinner, subtler and subtler. One time, Trungpa Rinpoche was describing the stage just before enlightenment. And he said that the practitioner at that stage of the path realizes that they're just about to get enlightened, but that something is holding them back. And then they realize what it is. It's the effort to get enlightened. And with that, they snap through it and enlightenment occurs. This is called the 11th stage of the Bodhisattva path, the 11th bhumi. So that's one way of putting it. I think fundamentally, though, from everything that I've heard from him and everybody else, it's basically sort of indescribable. He said once, it's like a joke that you can't tell twice. Or they talk about it as awakening. And as long as we're thinking, am I awake? Yes, I'm awake. Something fishy, right? That's a great question, though. Thank you.
What I find interesting is that although the Mahayana denies the teachings of the Hinayana, the 12 nidanas and so on, it really doesn't deny it completely.
No.
It says, you know, these teachings are valuable, that they can serve you, but they're really just a model. They're really just a model and not reality itself.
Can you get
just to know that you're using a model?
Yeah, it's really a conundrum, isn't it? Look, can you get those batteries? Yeah, pass the mic over and we'll put new batteries in it. Yeah, it's such a conundrum. It's really true. I mean, and there's an appreciation for the path, for the fact that we all have to go through this and discover it, each one of us, for ourselves. There's no substitute. It's a lonely experience, and really, yeah, each one of us goes through it. But we've got the helpers, these people who have gone before and given us all these great teachings, you know.
Did they have a teacher?
I'm sorry, what?
Did they have a teacher?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, I mean people after the Buddha?
No, they like all-time Pratyekabuddhas.
Pratyekabuddhas. Well, the Pratyekabuddha, you see, that's what it means, self-enlightened. They felt that they didn't need a teacher.
So where would they get the teachings from?
They get them from a teacher, but then they don't really relate to the teacher with a feeling of devotion and intimacy, and they'd go off and just practice by themselves. But they had to get it from somewhere. But there's not a lot of devotion to the lineage. There's not a lot of emphasis on the lineage on the part of the Pratyekabuddha. That's why they're sort of, they call them self-enlightened Buddhas. There's a particular style. And believe me, there are plenty of people today, you know, who are like that. And I'm not, it's not a slam, you know, you can go a long way that way. But ultimately, you have to go beyond that too. It's too self-contained. Yes.
So the Pratyekabuddhas were very self-enlightened and they didn't really believe in a teacher. How could they make the jump into the Mahayana if they thought that that was sort of their version of enlightenment and they didn't relate to a teacher that could guide them further than that? How did each practitioner know how to take the next step onto a further jhana?
I mean, I think it must vary from one person to the next widely. Some people will die at Pratyekabuddha and they'll have to go through rebirths. You know, this is the Buddhist scheme, before they can enter the Mahayana and proceed further on the path. Other people won't. They'll get it now. But the main thing is the practice of Vipassana is very powerful in moving people along the path. You see, it's called insight. It's often translated as insight. It's sort of super knowing. That's what Vipassana means in Sanskrit. And the idea is, what does it say? It's a hlak tong in Tibetan, which means the same thing. And the idea is that when you develop this wide open awareness of in the present moment, you're beginning to see reality as it actually is, stripped of concept. The more you come back to the present, the more you're seeing what's arising without the labels of car, truck, person, good, bad, all those things that we superimpose on what's happening in the present moment, all of which have a reference to the past and the future. When you label something like a table, it's because you want to use it as a table, or because you did use it as a table. Yeah?
You can't label a table unless you see the table.
Right.
It's completely relational. Table
Right.
Doesn't pop out of nowhere.
Doesn't pop out of nowhere. These are labels that we fix onto our experience. In fact, in the Tibetan, the word is namtak, and it's usually it can be translated as tag, as though you took a piece of paper, wrote the word table on it, and stuck it to the table. There's the experience, and here's the name, right? So the progress of the path is that we come more and more into our experience. And Vipassana is all about that. So we begin to see the world stripped of our experience. We are opening our minds and our hearts open in Vipassana, because you are giving away, every time you come present, you're giving away the awareness of self. And so you become much more intelligent, and that intelligence has this two aspects to it. That on the one hand, we see the world stripped of concept, and on the other hand, we are open to what's really going on, and we can feel it in a much fuller way, which is really what compassion is about. It's about resonance, being able to resonate with the world, you see. And so the more one practices Vipassana, at whatever level of the path, Pratyekabuddha or Shravaka, the more you begin to move into the Mahayana. You're developing prajna, that's completely clear seeing, and compassion, karuna, which is this openness of mind-heart. In Buddhism, the mind and the heart are in unity. They're located here, the mind. This is the center of mentation. And it's also the heart. It's called the Hridaya. The heart chakra. And they're in complete unity. You talk about body, speech, and mind. This is when you do tantric practice, and you'll visualize the centers, the chakras. Body's here, speech is here, and mind is here. It's where the heart is, the Hridaya. So when you begin to come the present through the practice of Vipassana, there's a wonderful book called by a wonderful teacher, Tulku Ujin. He's the father of Tsoknyi Rinpoche and of Mingyur Rinpoche and of Chikyi Nyima Rinpoche. He did, Tulku Ujin. A lot of my Dharma brothers and sisters, not a lot, but a number of them went and studied with him after Trungpa Rinpoche died. And his students, some of whom were terrific translators, collected his teachings into some books, one of which I've taken into retreat, called Rainbow Painting. And in Rainbow Painting, he says, call it what you will. At the beginning stage of the path, you call it Vipassana. At the next stage, you call it Shunyata. At the next stage, you might be calling it Mahamudra. And at the last stage, he's Nyingma, you call it Dzogchen, great perfection. It's all the same practice. It's all resting in awareness in the present moment. And when you do that, insight occurs. Insight into what? Insight into the non-existence of I and other. That's the first thing. That's what reveals, that's what Shunyata is. Shunyata is the understanding that I and other are fictions. The emptiness, Shunyata means emptiness, voidness. What is it empty of? It's empty of I, the belief in I, and the belief in other. Manjushri, the bodhisattva of wisdom, he represents prajna. He carries the twofold sword, right? The two-edged sword. It's the two edges. One cuts through belief in I, one cuts through belief in other. They talk about the two veils, which veil us and veil reality. One is the veil of conflicting emotions. That's the belief in I. When you believe in yourself, you're constantly in an emotional conflict with the world. Jealousy, lust, hatred, anger. And the other veil is called primitive beliefs about reality. And that's the belief that other exists. So, and that sword cuts through them both. That's Vipassana. Shunyata, Mahamudra, Dzogchen. Resting in this open awareness. I'm telling you this because I want you all to do it. You know, and many, many of you are. And it's my practice. It'll be my practice till I die. It's the core practice. And in fact, the ultimate practice is Guru Yoga. That's the last stage of the path. And what Guru Yoga is when you understand that the teacher's mind is just this open space of awareness. And the thought of the teacher, because you've developed this understanding that his or her mind is that, the thought of that brings you back into it. And that's what Guru Yoga is all about. Okay, got me wound up, sorry. Marie.
If there is no such a thing as I and other, and if egolessness works against selfishness, then how egolessness doesn't work against compassion too? Because if there is no such a thing as I and other, how do we feel compassion towards other?
Compassion at that stage, you know, of the enlightened mind, or even before, in the Mahayana stage of the path, is more a property of the field of awareness than it is a feeling of, you know, feeling sorry for. That's not compassion. Feeling sorry for is full of ego, you know, full of I, and has all kinds of complications built in. What am I going to get out of this? Will people admire me? You know, am I being a good person? All those kinds of things, right? They're very egoful. But compassion becomes a property of the field, that the field of awareness, of being, is clear, and it's full of love. It's lit. It's beautiful. It's alive. It's full of color. You know, the blackness of black and the blueness of blue, and the sound is so vivid, and all of this. You could fall in love with it. It's ecstasy. And at the ultimate stage of the path, when you get to the very advanced stages, it's bliss. And they call it that. The word is sukha in Sanskrit. And they talk about mahasukha, great bliss. Dewa Chen in Tibetan. And that's sort of the heating up of compassion. It's like it permeates everything. You look puzzled. No? Okay. Yeah, it's...
How can one find, things like self-worth, dignity, which are valuable to have on the path after having realized egolessness? There seems to be a contradiction there.
No, you answer that question. You can answer that.
Oh, God.
I
mean, the first thing that comes to mind is no choice.
Yes, that's great. Thank you, that's very helpful. No choice. No choice. And when there's truly no choice and no complaint about no choice, right? You're not saying, oh, I don't have a choice. It's no choice because you're just locked into what's real. And it's completely obvious and clear, right? There is tremendous dignity in that. What was the other one you wanted? Dignity and
self-worth.
Self-worth. I mean, you don't have to be thinking, I'm valuable.
You can just be valuable.
Exactly. Thank you. You can just be valuable. Just
Thank
be
you.
valuable. I mean, the Shambhala teachings that Trungpa Rinpoche gave us are all about basic goodness. That's what the term is. I forget what the Tibetan is for that. And the idea is that we and this life are fundamentally valuable. Fundamentally. For no reason at all. There's no, like it's valuable because it's gonna make me rich tomorrow. You know? It's valuable, it's worth being here for. Everything. There's tremendous solidity and dignity in that. I wish we had Shambhala, the Path of the Warrior here. There's a reading in that on the beginning of the book. You ever anybody here own Shambhala, the Path of the Warrior? No. Yes, 1, 2. Yeah. If you open up the book and you scan through the first few pages and you find the Tibetan, that's and then on the facing page there's a translation of the Tibetan. That's from the letter of the Black Ashe. And it's all about confidence. The confidence to be exactly who and what we are. And when we do that, there is huge virtue and goodness that arises. But when we don't have confidence, when we feel we have to make things better and protect ourselves, then we go out and commit crimes. And that's what that page is about. You can take a look at it again. It's in poetic language. It's from a text, a Dharma, that Trungpa Rinpoche received, called The Letter of the Black Ashe. Tim.
I could be misunderstanding this, but perhaps not. It also brings to my mind the idea of liberty and opportunity. So that the fact that we're here at all, and that we've heard the teachings, and that we can practice because we're not enslaved or in a place where we didn't hear the teachings or whatever, that has nothing to do with me, the ego. It's just being here, right? So there's value in just existing.
Exactly. That's what basic goodness is about. There's value in just being here. It's worth being here. The whole thing is wholesome, worth interacting with, worth loving. And when we fall into doubt, self-doubt, and depression, it's because we've lost this confidence in the basic being. We feel like I'm not okay, I'm not good, I'm flawed, or it won't be okay. It's going to be bad. And it's all about, judgment and often the future. Even when we're looking at the past and thinking, I fucked up in the past, it's about the future. I'm going to be judged, I'm going to be bad again in the future. Fritz Perls, he was a famous psychoanalyst. He invented Gestalt therapy. And he said all thoughts about the past are thoughts about the future. And I think he's really right, because when you think about the past, it's in terms of what's going to happen in the future. You don't want it to happen in the future. You do want it to happen in the future, whatever it might be. Yeah. And when he talked in that page, Letter of the Black Ashe, when he was talking about this confidence, it's confidence, it's the ultimate confidence. It's confidence that is so confident, it's silent. It's completely silent. I mean, when you walk upstairs, you're not thinking, can I do this? Yeah, I can do this. You're just doing it. It's that kind of confidence. Unconditional confidence. Thank you. The word for it in Tibetan, I love the word, is ziji. Remember ziji? And when Rinpoche when he first started giving us the Shambhala teachings, and he invented these programs, they're called Shambhala trainings. And at first there were 5 levels, 5 Shambhala training levels. And he did this poster. And I couldn't understand why. The poster was a very stylized calligraphy, like this. And what it was ziji, confidence. And I was thinking, confidence? I thought it should be about Dharma or, Buddhism or something. But I was climbing a lot in those days. Technical rock climbing, cliffs, ropes. You can go see it, that movie that's out there now, Free Solo? That's what I used to do, except I didn't do it like he did it without ropes. I had friends who did it without ropes, free soloed, and I had 4 friends who died doing it, free soloing. But one of the first things you learn when you're climbing is the power of confidence. And what happens when you don't have it? And when you don't have it, and you're trying to do something really, really hard, it's like doing acrobatics, on a rock face, and you don't have the confidence, it goes to hell in a handbasket, just like that, And when you have confidence, there's that psychologist. He coined the term flow. I can never pronounce his name. It's a Polish name. Lots of letters, and you can. Sounds like you're gargling. Mihaly, that's right. His first name is Mihaly. Like that, huh? It's 9 o'clock. We gotta stop. So anyhow, but he coined the term flow, and I saw it so many times in climbing, rock climbing, that when people had confidence, they were in a state of flow, and they just were grace. And when you lose confidence, it turns into like tractor toys. Huh? You do. Good. It's a cool book, yeah. All right, we should end. That's it. So let's say the dedication of merit. By this merit, may all attain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy, wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great East, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory. And there you had it, by the confidence of the golden sun of the great East.